Welcome back to the Wag Tales podcast. It is my first episode for 2025, and I'm very excited. I have a really special guest joining me all the way from New Zealand today. So, welcome to the podcast, Gloria.
Oh, thank you. It's awesome to be here.
So, Gloria, I'd like to start the podcast by asking my guest just to share with us something you're excited about at the moment.
Okay, well, what I'm excited about is that my book has been funded to go into schools, which means that more kids can be saved, which means that parents and educators get an opportunity to learn how to keep them safe from sexual abuse and trafficking. So I'm excited about that. On a personal level, I'm excited because I'm going on leave on Friday and I've got 2 weeks.
Oh, wow. Are you headed anywhere special?
Oh, a few places across New Zealand, but it's just going to be nice just to not think.
I know. I've actually just come back from not thinking, so bear with me if I
Oh,
stumble a little bit. I'm switching my brain back on.
yeah.
So, Gloria, with your book, actually, I've been following your work for a little while, and we'll definitely dive into talking about how it all emerged.
Yeah.
But love to maybe just start by talking about your book that you've just mentioned. So, can you let us know what it is, what teachers would expect when they get their hands on it?
Oh, thank you. So I've got a copy here just to show. Look, honestly, I'm not trying to do a hard sell. I don't need to. Basically, what I'm trying to do through this book is educate teachers, parents, and other safe adults on what to do in a variety of cases. So the book's divided up, I think, into 11 modules. At the end of each module is a checklist so that if you're working your way through one of the modules and you get to the end and you think, actually, I'm pretty okay with it, but there could be two or three areas, you tick the two or three, and that forms part of your kind of roadmap. So you see the GPS coordinates, that's my play on that. So how you get to the end is entirely individualized, which I quite like. But
Mm,
so kind of the 11 core elements and none of it will surprise you is what child sexual abuse actually is because people don't always not uh, don't fully understand and they think it must just be, I'm not discounting any of it, full rape. No, it can be an adult making a child sit there watching images
mm-hmm.
of, child sexual abuse materials, we call it. Grooming. This is huge throughout the world. Megan, you'll be seeing it in schools and across wherever children are.
Yep.
Grooming is huge. So there's a whole section designated to that because we know there's four different levels. There's a child that gets groomed, parents that get groomed, community around them is where grooming could be happening, and society generally. So
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, we dive into that and have a look at where that sits. I think the next thing is online sexual abuse because again, that's a newish play to the field as in the past 3 years. I think you'd agree.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Honestly, I was working actually still in schools during the lockdown periods during COVID. And that was one of the biggest things we were actually responding to at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, this isn't necessarily written for children. It's not a book for children. It's a book for adults, safe adults to read and then teach children or talk to
Mm.
children about it.
Yep.
The cognition is not there yet. We can't expect them to fully comprehend all of that. The next one is child sex trafficking, shock horror. Most children who are child sex trafficked sleep in their own beds at night.
Yep. So a bit of a misconception there that often is held about what sex trafficking actually is and what the definition of that might look like as well.
100%.
Yep.
We've got another one on symptoms of abuse. We've got tools for children, tools for adults, a directive section on what to do if a child discloses,
Mm-hmm.
which is quite a popular one. And then impact on children and impact on parents, because this is all so integrated and needs to be. But look, I'm proud of the work I did. I think had I been, had I had that taught to me, or had I had this hand sign, I would have used it. Hands
Mm.
down, I would have used it. So I just think let's give the kids some hope. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, so Gloria, for those listening, I'm sure I will have done a pretty decent introduction that people will have heard. But how did you land in this work? So why this work? What's your journey that's led you here?
Yes, and look, I'm smiling and I'm happy and I'm in a place in life where, so grateful to be here. But my first 16 years were like something out of a horror movie. And I was born into a family where child sex trafficking through the generations was typical and
Hmm.
normal and normalized. And so I never stood a chance. From when I was born, I was abused by my father. In my early toddler years, he then shared me with his family and friends. Once I got to the age of 5, my grandmother, his mother, trained me. She got paid commission to train me in how to please men and women sexually. So I could be the best child sex worker or slave I could be. Now, what then happened from the age of 6 is I was then trafficked to bigger groups and groups in the elite sector who would pay a great deal of money for that privilege, if you want to use a word like that. So, yeah, it was pretty hard to feel anything other than completely traumatized. And yeah, very lucky to be alive. Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Mm.
so ultimately, what we're talking about here is you're now supporting adults to actually look for signs of this, know how to support children who
Yeah.
may be experiencing sexual abuse,
Yeah.
and supporting us to actually get them to be safe and get them out of those situations ultimately. So
Yeah.
I'm assuming in your story, Gloria, that those adults were lacking in your life. So there was sort of no adults at school or no social workers showing up and wrapping around you at the time.
There were no safe adults in my family, neighborhood, or community. And by that I mean, when I went to school, it was my only safe place. But
Mm,
because it was safe, no one was after me to abuse me and hurt me. Because it was safe, I was free to be me. So if you can appreciate, and the amazing survivors watching can appreciate, when you're living in an environment where you're always under threat of harm, you put on what you can as a false self to cope and manage it. So I became highly agreeable, compliant, the carer, the child that everyone loved, because I wanted to be as safe as I could.
mm,
At school, I was out of control. And I would run through the corridors, ripping kids' bags off hooks, stealing their lunches because I never got food given to me easily or had enough food to eat. And partly that was because the pedophiles would pay more money for a child that looked younger.
mm,
Mm.
yeah.
So, yeah. So, no adult at school picked up what I was putting down. They may have wondered why I was so out of control, but back in those days, they never asked. And yeah,
Yeah,
my,
I think
my parents would never have admitted anything, put it that way.
absolutely. Yeah, but I think what we would hope to see now is that we actually do have educators and staff in schools who have a bit more insight and a bit more training around what trauma actually looks like in a child's
Yeah,
behaviour
yeah.
as well, and to start asking those questions and to know that that child's asking for support, not deliberately trying to just cause havoc in the hallways.
Yeah, and I think to be fair to teachers, they're teaching in our country 13 curriculum areas. They're not
Mm,
trained, or if they're teaching and have been teaching for more than 5 years, they haven't been trained on how to manage this epidemic of which is child sexual abuse. So they've got no idea of what to do apart from instinctively. And the problem is because he's so overstretched, it's really hard for them to work with a child that is considered out of control or at risk. It's very, very difficult. And that's why I wanted to write a book like this just so that teachers and parents have got something they can use because at the moment, everyone reacts differently. Megan, you and I could look at the same accident. You could see it differently to me. But am I right? No, we both saw what we saw. We just absorbed it in a different way.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And our protective mechanisms just act out in different ways as well. Because it was interesting actually that you said a protective mechanism that was going on for you was that almost people pleasing, what's sometimes referred to as fawning,
Yes.
to keep yourself as safe as possible, which can feel a bit confusing, I think, for a lot of people too, if they're falling into that space as well.
Well, because people would say, in the home environment and community around, and people who were happy to abuse me would say, "What a lovely girl, isn't she? She's so happy, she's so this." But it was this false self I put on to keep safe. So no
Mm,
one saw the real me. But you're right. And fawn, there's four trauma responses: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And I adopted that predominantly. But
mm.
hey, we can all oscillate between, and some choose predominantly fight. But yeah, very big, very, very big life. Not what I would have chosen. But he,
Yeah. Well, Gloria, I'm sort of curious as well because I'm aware this is actually your third book, not your first book that you've just
yeah,
released as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
And I know one of them actually explores your healing and tips for healing for people that have actually gone through these types of experiences as well. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can maybe speak to us a little bit about what that healing has actually looked like.
So yeah, Flight Path to Healing is quite a cool one for survivors actually. And here I am, no, so humble, you would agree. No, I'm just saying what I get told. But I think because I'm a lived survivor, I've got lived experience, I can talk more knowledgeably perhaps than someone who's researched it. I've lived it, so I get what works. But for me, I think, look, there's lots of modalities out there. I think I tried them all.
Mm,
I loved things like yoga. I still go to therapy occasionally. I love exercise. It saves me because it takes me out of my head and gives me like a stress release.
mm.
And meditation is also another key one for me. If I don't do both those things most days, I'm not quite as calm or centered.
Yeah.
Uh, but initially it was journaling. For some survivors, writing it out is huge cathartic release. A support group with other survivors can be incredible. Because Megan, what happens is, as a survivor, we try and share our story, but not everyone can hear it because it's really hard for people to accept that that could happen.
Yeah, I've actually heard you speak about this idea of cognitive dissonance
Yeah.
and how that actually can play a bit of a role and ultimately can continue the harm in lots of ways as well. So did you want to maybe explain to people what we mean when we're talking about cognitive dissonance
Yeah,
and how
sure.
that plays out when people do hear stories like yours?
Um, I think what happens, and I'm just trying to be gentle and respectful of people who may have wondered if something's gone on in a survivor, friend, or family member of theirs and haven't been able to speak to it. So here goes. To my mind, it's just my opinion. I think cognitive dissonance is a situation where you hear about child sexual abuse and a story from a survivor about their lived experience. And now, immediately, because of you and the amazing person you are, you as an example, Megan, um, because of your ethics and your morals and the values you live your life according to, it's really hard to wrap your head around that could be a reality too. So it's actually easier, not always deliberate, easier to turn away.
Mm,
That can't happen. I don't know of nothing about that. That doesn't feel right. That's not okay. Oh, I don't want to think about it. I'll keep on doing what I do. So that tends to be what happens. But
yeah.
fortunately, people out there, amazing survivors watching, I hope, um, all that does is give a free pass to the predators who wish to hurt our children and grandchildren.
Yeah, absolutely. Because ultimately, when we're sort of confronted with something like a story of child sex abuse, it actually confronts our whole worldview. And if I'm going to engage with that story, I'm then going to have to, I guess, accept and acknowledge a different world to what I'd like to believe actually exists.
Yeah.
And that can be a very uncomfortable transition process to go from my protected, safe world to the one where child sex abuse actually does exist. And we know it exists, but
Yes.
shifting that worldview and holding space for that can be quite a challenge.
And it is, and look, I have empathy, but I have to say with respect that I need to move past empathy for the safe adults and move to protection and advocacy for the at-risk and being abused children.
Absolutely.
So we all have to move out of that space. I'm sorry it's uncomfortable. Can you imagine how uncomfortable it is for me as a survivor to keep telling my story?
Mm.
That would probably be 5 times more uncomfortable for me talking than for someone listening. But can we then multiply that by 100? Because that's the child today going through it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think just before we started recording, Gloria, I was letting you know that I used to work in schools and then now I support schools and support adults really working with children that have experienced a bit of trauma. And one of the things that they sort of bring up a lot is when they're getting a lot of disclosures or a lot of child protection reports going on, that's when they're quite stressed about it. But I often say to them, it shows that you're actually doing your job really well because those stories exist. Whether the child's sharing it or not is the hard part. So if they're not sharing it, well, then that child's not getting access to safety. If they're sharing it with you, you're really doing your job well because they feel safe enough to actually come to you and they know that you're going to do something about it.
And look, here's a little tip just because I can. Speaking to our very senior police here, you can encourage teachers and safe adults to record what the child says on your phone with the caution you may not ask any leading
Mm,
questions. Because once you record, that can be used as evidence. Advantage is you're not missing any of the story. Disadvantage for some people is they can't not ask, which then that evidence is not able to be admitted.
mm. Really valid point too. And I will say, as someone who did used to work directly with the young people, I would often then make the report to child protection, and I would actually get a bit of pushback from child protection, going, "Why didn't you find out about this? Why didn't you ask them about that?" And they want that information, and I go, "I'm the safe adult that young person chose to come and speak to. I listened, I documented, and I'm giving it to you.
Yeah.
I'm not an investigator." I'm doing what I can to keep this child safe within the realms of my role.
Yes. Yes.
Which can can be a little bit of a tricky situation because as we know, the adult sitting beside the child in those moments as well is going to actually have their stress system potentially activated as well as they support this young person in that distress.
Well, they've just now been passed a baton, which is full of how do I keep this child safe? How do I inform parents, caregivers, let alone the authorities? What happens if the child's going home to the abuser? I mean, there's so many levels and layers of this. It's very, very challenging for any teacher or safe adult to have this information shared. And I get it. And if you add into that, up to 1 in 3 of us have been abused sexually as children, there's going to be teachers that fall into that category. And I know when I've spoken in schools, teachers have approached me afterwards and shared their stories. So, there's whole levels and layers and yeah.
Yeah. But I think what we need, the main message that I just want to keep humming through is
Yeah.
if a child is disclosing to you, you're doing your job well, and that is one more child that we can actually keep safe. And that is what we're aiming for.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah, so Gloria, you showed your hand model briefly when we were sort of talking about your book, but I'd love to talk it through so that we can actually potentially spread this to people listening and they can share it with young people as
Yeah.
well. So,
So
yeah, can we
talking
talk a
about
bit?
the global
Yeah,
time? Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So it's this hand up, thumb across, palm closed. Now, children won't do it like in Gloria Nana. They'll do it down by the side. They'll do it behind their back. They might do it out to the side. They might even do it behind their head.
Yeah.
The reality is that it's only 3 steps. I released it last year on our Global Awareness Day so that children under 16s had a way to communicate they were being abused or trafficked and not safe. This was initially a universal help signal. You've seen it across the world, but in the last 18 months, it's been used a lot by under 16s, and that was my point. We have to move past the theory that, or the cognitive belief that children will speak. Actually, not easily. Only 5 to 10% of children will ever disclose verbally.
Yeah.
So my thing is, we know children don't, so let's give them some tools. So that's partly why I wrote the book, and that's partly why this is in there.
Yeah.
Let's hashtag let's save some kids. And I think anyone who sees that hand sign needs to take some action.
Yeah.
I saw a chiropractor during the week, quite fortuitously, and he mentioned the hand sign. And he told me after speaking to me, he told me while we were speaking that every time a child or teenager walks into his office with a parent, he always looks straight to the hands to see if they sign in. Isn't that great?
Yes, that is amazing. That is amazing. That's what we need.
Imagine if we had that on billboards across Australia, New Zealand, the world. Imagine the kids that could be saved.
Yeah,
Wow.
absolutely. Yeah, huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gloria, I'm curious because ultimately, you've had that challenging experience early in life, and now your whole world is really wrapping around how we can keep other kids safe. And we've talked about your healing, but what do you do to take care of yourself as you navigate this work and as you host a podcast and you're continually, I guess, hearing extra stories and yeah, just like really, really deep in this world. I'm wondering what you do to take care of your well-being.
Yeah, no, thank you. Well, look, I love dancing. Potentially not well if you ask my partner, but I love dancing. I love having fun. Anything silly gets me. I'm the one that will be laughing because a dog bashed his head against a wall sort of thing. But I also love exercise, so I'm heavily into kind of walking or cycling or swimming or whatever, just because I love being outside and doing physical things. I think it helps integrate me, and the work is so heavy and deep. I need to get out. And I think the other thing too is that the just catching up with people, having some fun. Yeah, just having that kind of balance because I can give, but I'm more effective if I give from a full cup than an empty, which sounds so easy and has taken me decades to do.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm glad you actually shared that as well, because I know there'll be people listening that are supporting young people and are potentially not always having that full cup and are trying to figure out ways to get that full cup as well.
And look, we're all different. So,
Yeah.
in winter, it's probably me in front of Netflix having a glass of wine and eating potato chips. I mean, it just depends. But I think what I've learned is, listening to my body and recognizing I'm tired. And sometimes being tired, the best thing I can do is get out on the bike and go for a bike ride and just look at nature or sit on the beach and look at the trees or the water, or it might be blobbing out in front of Netflix. I mean, I think we just have to listen to ourselves. And if there's one thing I could give the teachers and parents watching is start noticing what your inner voice is telling you because it might be saying, hey, could you just sit down for 10 minutes with a cup of tea? Yeah.
Powerful message, because I feel like sometimes when we're talking about well-being and taking care of ourselves and working with young people, it's always do more, do this, push harder, like fill your timetable with extra things to look after yourself. And sometimes it is that self-compassion of just going, actually, you're doing a lot, do a little bit less.
I think so. Give yourself some grace. And someone said, well, how do I do that? And here's a real simple one. You might love this. When you're wanting, really deeply wanting just to rest or just to do nothing, imagine what you would say if that was your best friend.
Such a good one.
Got ya.
No, it's a really good one because we ultimately would never talk to our best friend the way we sometimes talk to ourselves. I think that's a really powerful one. Yeah. Gloria, earlier you mentioned grooming as well, and I think it might be a really important area for us to talk about.
Yeah.
So you mentioned societal grooming and community grooming, because I'm sure a lot of people listening would be like, oh, yeah, there's a lot of grooming that happens to the individual, and I know about that, and we learn about that. But I'm wondering if you could maybe tell us a little bit more about those extra layers of grooming that can occur.
Sure. A really good question. Thanks for that. So when we discuss child sexual abuse and trafficking and all of the heinous crimes against children in this space, there's a misnomer that it's the child that's being groomed. No, there's usually one or two other groups. So out of the four groups, society, community, parents, and child, it's actually the parents that are the biggest group that are being groomed. Because when you pan back, people can only get access to a child through parents. So parents are the gatekeepers. So I think it's important to recognize that a child does not, an 8-year-old does not have permission to stay over or go on a camping trip or be involved in sporting training unless a parent has signed something or agreed to something. So it's often the parents that are groomed. That's what I stand beside.
Mm,
Children are groomed during the act or leading up to the act in terms of that can either be through manipulation, um, bribery, gift giving, or just threats. If you don't come with me and do this, I'm going to get your younger brother, or I'm going to, you'll never see your mum again. And what we know about children is very vulnerable and vulnerable in that they are conditioned, you would agree, to do what an adult says.
mm-hmm. Yep.
So they're easy targets. But so that's how children can be groomed. And if they're told, which I was many times, if you ever tell anyone about this, I'm going to kill you. Yeah, you see enough or experience enough that you believe those words.
Mm,
So this again is what happens when you're a child experiencing this. You've got no power. You haven't got the cognitive ability actually to discern what is real and what isn't. You just believe what you're told.
mm-hmm.
So that's that grooming. Now, I think the community grooming is you get it might be a male, although we are starting to see that between 28 and 32% of predators are women. And you'll
Mm,
start seeing more footage of that in Australia, I'm sure. We see it here in New Zealand. It's out across the world. It's often not believed, but I'm here to tell you, yes, it's true. And that community does this thing where, oh, go to Mr. Barnes. He's the one that does all the footy and he's really good. The kids really like him. And so when it comes time for the child to say, well, actually, he hurt me or he sexually abused me, people refuse to believe it because the whole
mm,
community's been groomed to think he's a great guy. And how many times have we heard this when survivors and their families get to court is all these testimonies about what a wonderful man he was. No, he was an effing sexual predator who deliberately chose to find, groom, um, uh, and then abuse your child. That is not a good guy.
yep. Absolutely. And we see the media reinforcing that stand as well.
That they'll have things like underage woman assaulted. I'm sorry, underage. No, a child was assaulted
Yep.
or
Yep.
raped.
Absolutely.
Languaging is very powerful in these situations and specifically with grooming. So the last group is society, and I'll give you an example. So in society, as I've just said, languaging is really important, but what we have is for instance, that there's a great deal happening around child sexual abuse, except the government doesn't want to put any money into funding more protection for the online exploitation or sextortion of children. Hello. they know it's a big deal, but they don't want to fund anything. Or there's a move afoot in the States to change the word term pedophile to MAPS, minor attracted persons.
Oh, how is that helping anyone?
Well, sorry, who does that serve? Would you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I saw something the other day and I thought it was great, with the TikTok thing over in America at the moment, they're removing it. So someone wrote this meme and I loved it. And it had, if they can remove TikTok in a day, it shows the same could happen for child, um, sexual abuse and imaging online,
Mm,
yet it's not. So
yep,
why is the
yeah,
question? Yeah. Did
yeah.
that answer your kind of question on
Oh,
grooming?
definitely. I think it's the reason I really wanted to ask that was I think, yeah, we just need to move past that misconception that it only happens to the child. And I
Yeah.
think if we want adults to be, proactive and more aware, they need to be aware of these layers that are happening as well and not thinking it's all just happening to the child and that they would know if something was wrong, that there's like things to really look for.
What's interesting as well, I spoke at one school in North Auckland college, and one of the questions from the floor was from a mum who she had a 10-year-old boy, and he'd said to her recently, I don't want to go to so and so's house anymore. I don't like his dad. He always wants us to get into the spa pool, and I don't like it. It makes me feel yuck. And anyway, so this mum, and she was just being honest, but she said, look, I would struggle to do anything about that because they're friends of friends. People think they're a great family. We've had their son over to stay so many times. I think it would be rude not to. So, and so she doesn't want to accuse anyone, but she doesn't want to do anything to alert anyone either. So my response was, so your son will keep going until he's potentially abused, or? But yeah, people really struggle to take a stand or make a stand.
So I'm curious, Gloria, like what would you be advising? Because I assume that this is actually quite a shared stance. Like this is something that a lot of parents, a lot of people in society would be saying to each other and sort of
Well,
thinking
they
that
want,
they've
yeah,
done the checks on the adult because they know the adult. It's sort of yeah.
but they want proof. Now, I can't give you proof, neither can the child. They're trusting their instinct, which is one of the chapters in the book on tools for children, is to start teaching children to trust that icky feeling, or start teaching children my body is mine. No one has to touch it apart from me unless it's a doctor and mummy or daddy is in the room, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But of course, with these parents, they don't want to make waves. Everyone wants to be liked and accepted, which I understand, but they also don't want to falsely accuse. I guess what I'm trying to say respectfully is I think that ship may have sailed because our numbers are growing. So I think it may be time. You don't have to call anyone out on anything, but suddenly your son is not as available to do sleepovers. Suddenly, if there's any sleepovers, it may just always be his mate coming to him. Or if you're going to be at their house, you are in the room with that child until you leave.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what I would say. Get some caution in place, because that same parent, I felt for this lovely young mum, because at some point, if she's allowed this to continue, her son will come to her, and then she's going to have to face into she felt too didn't have quite the confidence to stop it.
Because I think part of what's alarming when we look at the stats is not only is that children and that's the number of children that are actually experiencing this, but it does alert us to the fact that there's a high number of perpetrators and offenders in our community as well, and that ultimately we will know someone who has perpetrated or offended as well. And that can be quite a confronting thing to sit with and just to be aware. Well, when we think about the grooming aspect that we just spoke about, it may not be so easy for us to trust our gut or to trust our instincts around that as the adults.
It's interesting though, because our instincts do, we do know, our instincts do tell us. And I know, I'm sure that I've been sitting in front of predators because the podcast I do is in 90 countries now, which is amazing for one small tiny charity in New Zealand. So very happy to be doing the work, but equally I can even get tricked sometimes. And it wasn't till later I look back and I think, yeah, I think he was a pedophile.
Mm.
Yeah. Instinct is everything. Where they call it a sixth sense for
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Gloria, I actually I allow my community to sort of submit questions for podcast guests as well
Good.
as they're coming up. And I
Yeah.
actually had a really good question come through from an amazing educator who I'm very aware works with some pretty vulnerable young people
Yeah.
and listens to the podcast quite frequently. So she was actually asking, how can she best navigate sort of sharing sexual education curriculum with young people, knowing that there will be some young people who have potentially experienced abuse in the classroom when she is sharing that curriculum? And I'm assuming your book probably outlines some of this, but I'm just wondering if you can give us a few tips.
Yeah. I think number one, always have a trigger warning and always have an exit or a place where perhaps that child, if they need to, can leave the room um, and go into another space because that could be very triggering and confronting. And if you're aware of who it might be or the children it may be, although I suspect there will be others who you may not have suspected, um, have things like these little spinny toys you can have, or these toys you can, the old cush balls, the old softballs you can squeeze. Have things children can be doing while they're listening so that they've got a way to release it through their body. I think that would be some things I would suggest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. And as someone, I did used to work in alternative education. So I was always working with young people who mainstream schools hadn't necessarily been the most successful place for them. And for a lot of the time, that was often related to childhood trauma and the behaviours that we'd see. And I can safely say, anytime we did any sex ed curriculum, days around consent, anything like that, we always received extra disclosures around that period of time as well. So I think I'll just also share for the educators to be aware that if they're doing this well, they will actually hear from some young people potentially that something is happening.
And also give permission to a child or to the class if you don't want to signal anyone in particular that if they need to go to the bathroom, they don't have to ask permission during that session.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's a really good tip as well.
Mm.
Yeah. So, Gloria, I'm also really curious then for you as well. So, you said this all happened to you in the first 16 years of life.
Yeah.
So, what did between 16 and sort of, early adulthood look like for you as you removed yourself from that situation?
Train wreck. Yeah.
Yeah.
Train wreck. I was under the mistaken belief, and people will connect with this, I'm sure, that the minute I was safe, life would be magical. And don't get me wrong, it still remains. My 16th birthday remains as one of the most significant days of my entire life. And that's the day we have our Global Awareness Day every year. So I'm, so grateful for that day. But what I hadn't factored in was once I became safe, everything could then be released because I didn't have to hold on anymore so tightly. But of course, I was a child, 16-year child. And so I made bad choices. I got involved in situations I shouldn't have. I slept with too many people. I drank too much. I ended up with an eating disorder because partly because I hadn't been fed and I was never nurtured by my parents. So I got bulimia and I was just stuffing food down my throat, like really. But as well, I was able to pass school exams, not well, but enough. that I could pass. And I went on to become a teacher, which is why I could write that book. And then I went on to become a child shrink. So no surprises there. But it wasn't until I was in my early 30s and a mother myself that the full onslaught of the horror in terms of the memory recall began. So although when I was 13, I told a friend what was going on. I also told another friend when I was 19. When I was in my 30s was when the mind was safe enough and free enough to let it all come. And also the same-sex child being born and at the age I was when it all began. So, yeah, it was not a good when I say it wasn't good, it's entirely expected. And I don't, one of the things I think, Megan, that there's a few misnomers and myths out there, and here's some of them. For people like me that have survived this type of trauma, we're not going to become amazingly well-adjusted adults. We will usually end up on the wrong side of the law. For women, some can end up in the sex trade. For men, some can end up in violent criminal activity. For some, they will end up in, with suicidal ideation or alcohol and drug addiction. For some, we're up to 10 times more likely to take our own lives as children and as adults because of what we went through.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those, if you look at that, the cost to our society and our culture and our country, and all people see is that inversion. No one ever really tracks back and looks at what happened between there and there because that shaped that. Now, I'm an exception. I'm very grateful, but equally, I've had 30 years to heal from it. I'm, very lucky that I was able to do this and traverse my way through. Um, but there's nothing wrong at all, and I strongly stand by survivors who did turn to criminal activity or did turn to the sex trade or were suicidal. This is just the result of what happened. Give them some grace. What did
Absolutely.
what did we think would happen?
Mm-hmm. Especially, like I've had a lot of guests on where we talk about neuroscience, attachment, child development, and we know how crucial those early years are in brain development, in our
Mm,
understanding of relationships, of
yeah,
understanding our self worth. And we need safe adults and strong relationships and nurturing people around us to actually develop all of that in those early years as well. So you are definitely a remarkable example of someone who has done a great deal of healing in an adult capacity.
yeah. I'm grateful for it. I am no better or no worse than any other survivor, and thank you for the lovely words. I think I went through all of this because I've got quite a deep spiritual belief, not religious, spiritual belief. I think I went through all of this so I could do this work. My purpose in life is to help others by shining light on this darkness through love and humility. And if I can live my life doing that, I'm grateful.
Yeah, that's beautiful to hear, Gloria. Like definitely, yeah, out of all the darkness to see this light come through and to see this be able to be a change for so many other young people.
Yeah.
I have one more guest question,
Yeah.
audience question as well, which was someone asked actually what your relationship with self love has looked like. So I thought that might be a nice segue based on what you just said as well.
Yeah, no, that's lovely. Ask away. Look, self-love wasn't available to me. How could I, rhetorical question, how could I love myself when my sense of self was fully developed by the age of 8, and it's usually through the opposite sex parents. So if my daddy didn't love me or value me or see me more than something he could pick up and put down, it wasn't possible for me to feel it for me. And so one of the biggest challenges for me has been able to, look in the mirror and see love and that inner beauty and that amazing woman standing before me and really feel into that. It's taken a lot of work, a lot of pain, and a lot of grace to self. Um, but I think I'm there, and I totally understand why, as survivors, we struggle to get there. You see, you talked about attachment earlier. If we're not securely attached and safely attached, we're spinning. We're just in survival mode, and it's very hard to have a really strong sense of health, a self or grounded sense of self. And self-love, that's not for us. So we will choose to escape, and that can be through addictions, it can
Mm,
be through yeah, relationships that are wrong for us. And we know that because we're self-sabotaging. But
yeah,
does
yeah.
that kind of answer?
Oh, absolutely. Because I know that self sabotaging, that's often, yeah, a huge thing for young people or for like people that experience trauma in childhood.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense.
Well, it's one of we. It's a defense mechanism, and we know there's this amazing dude. I don't know if he's still alive, called Bibring, and he coined 43 defense mechanisms, and turning yourself bad is one of them. It was called reaction formation, and what it means is what you just said. So I could have a severely abused child in my home, give that child love, nurture, support, warmth, and safety, and they could just as easily start to um, be very ill behaved, abusive, out of control, and not comfortable at all, and just want to hurt, kick, and fight back because they need to turn it bad before it turns bad on them.
That's right. They can at least control how it turns bad because they assume it will turn bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Gloria, I feel like I'm keeping you longer than I probably told you I would. um,
We were late starting because of me, so
no,
you
all
go.
good. But what I do to end a podcast is I ask each of my guests 5 questions, which is just sort of
Okay.
a spontaneous little situation. So I'm
Yeah,
wondering if I can dive into those now with you.
of course.
So this one might be a hard one to answer, I'm not sure. But the first one is, what did you want to be when you were a child? So when you grew up, what were you hoping to be?
A doctor.
A doctor, nice. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in some ways you have ended up as a
Oh,
doctor of sorts.
doctor of sorts. The University of Life has given me a doctorate. Yeah.
The second question is, what are your 2 top values? So if you could just choose 2 values, what would they be?
Yeah. Look, I think honesty is big for me. And I think, yeah, being ethical is really important.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of falseness out there in the world. There's not a lot of authentic, and people will often say to me, "You're so authentic, you're so real." But I spent most of my life being the opposite, so I can't afford to slip back into that. So I think ethically, I have to have my own back, which means I can be real with people. Mm.
That's a really good point. Yeah. The third one is a bit of fun. So this one's about boxing, actually, the sport of boxing. So if you were going to have a boxing fight, what would be your walkout song that they play as you walk to the ring to get you ready to jump in there?
Um, um, what's that song? Oh, she's unstoppable. Is it Sia? Unstoppable.
Oh, yeah, I know the one you're talking about. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's a good one.
Yeah.
The fourth question is, if you could collaborate with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be?
I have thought about this. Do you know what? I think Nelson Mandela, because it was him that coined a couple of things I really value. And one was We judge a culture by the way it treats its children. And I think across the world, our cultures are not good.
Mm,
And the second is he was trapped in that prison cell for 27 odd years, and he had nothing but kindness and respect for the people who incarcerated him. And I just think, wow, how he could find that depth in him to be able to forgive and hold um, no resentment.
yeah,
That's a powerful human being.
absolutely. Like, imagine being able to just spend at least 10 minutes with him. Imagine.
Oh, I want him for dinner. I want to pick his brain. But and of course, if I could add a little clause to that, I would also love to spend time with a very big influencer or celebrity who was sexually abused as a child, because wouldn't that be something if these people started coming out more and more?
Yeah, absolutely. That's how
That's
yeah.
some kids.
Yeah, that's where we get some attention for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah.
yeah.
The final question, Gloria, is a big one, but it's
Oh,
if you could make one recommendation as a step that anyone can take towards healing, what would it be?
allow yourself to feel how you need to. And part of the answer is stop looking outside yourself for truth. Start going inside is where the real depth of wisdom lies. And if we could just trust our instinct and trust that what we get given is wisdom beyond anything we can pay for, that would be amazing. So I think trust what you get, but I understand that people do need to go and see a therapist, or do need to do some writing, or do need to join a support group or go to rehab. I understand all of that, but you'll get the nudging from within. And I think we've become so busy, and you said at the beginning of the podcast, we almost congratulated or celebrated for doing too much and being too busy. And I think it's time to actually turn that on its head and have it where it belongs, which is no, it's not good, it's not healthy. And we need to look after ourselves so we can hear ourselves. I think we're so busy distracting ourselves with our phones and gadgets and other people, we don't make enough time just to connect in. So I think that advice is trust yourself is
Mm,
fairly long-winded reply, but it's available to all of us. And guess what? It's free of charge.
yeah, no, that's actually a beautiful one, I think, and I love that that's accessible to all of us. So if we all just take that time to spend with
Yeah,
ourselves.
yeah.
Yeah. Gloria, I am so incredibly grateful that you made the time to come on the podcast. And I'm really hopeful that we've got some safe adults who have taken some of this on board and that we can actually support some more children and young people. Before we wrap up, I'm just wondering, is there anything else you wanted to share or
Yeah,
say?
there is actually, and thank you though. I really would encourage people, if they were so inclined, to please, if not for yourself, for a child you know, please go and look at Amazon, keeping kids safe, because you don't know who you're going to save by reading that. Now, look, it's in all versions. It's audio, it's an e-version. They're very inexpensive options, and paperback. But you know, we got a chance here of trying to help save some more children. And I just think, may I read the final quote out of the book? Because I think this says it all. So, whose job is it to protect children? She asked. Not mine, said one. Not my problem, said another. The question then becomes, if not you, then who?
Powerful.
Yeah. So
Thank you so much, Gloria.